This weekend, Denzel Washington was back in theaters taking out bad guys. So today we're going to stop and rank all 3 Equalizer films from the worst to the best. In last place, The Equalizer 2. Now, to be perfectly clear, I think that this is a fine, serviceable Equalizer film that delivers all the action thrills that I want from an Equalizer film. You've got, of course, Denzel Washington. In all of these movies, he's just a ton of fun to watch because he has that ability to be charming and affable, and then in a convincing manner, flip the switch and turn into the brutal killer that's so intentional and observant and meticulous. He can do that, and you get all of that in here. To that point, there's plenty of bone-snapping action, quite literal, sometimes bone-snapping action, graphic violence that I love from these films. And then we have a villain played by Pedro Pascal, who once again kind of creates another character in these movies that you're interested in with a backstory that ties to our lead character, that makes the motivation, what goes down in the third act much more personal this time around. And we get to learn Robert's background a little bit more about this organization, what he did, who he was connected with, how all of that mattered. But I think for that exact same reason, that's why I put it in last place, where I feel like I've seen that specific type of plot in these movies many times before. It feels like it almost shifts genres just a little bit in this one because it is about these organizations and these mercenaries and the person he mentored turned against him. And so now he's got to take them out. I feel like that loses a little bit of what makes the first and third ones kind of unique with what they do with the Equalizer character and the ties back to the original TV show from the 80s and what the original premise was about kind of this guy helping people out, local people out. And this shifts more towards this big, grander conspiracy type of plot line. And so it lost a little, it wasn't quite as compelling or interesting. It just felt more familiar, but it still has all the stuff I want. It's totally watchable. Our runner-up, The Equalizer 3, the new one. And this one changes up the formula, takes Robert from Boston, drops him in Italy. And that choice right there is exactly what makes this movie. It could feel a little bit played out. We've already seen Denzel Washington kill a lot of people in movies in the past, but by changing the setting, it puts the character in a different place where that set of skills that he uses to help the locals, or he did so in Boston, now you apply that to this new location, and it just makes something fresh about it. And in particular, the way the movie works, it treats the city itself as a character that has its own personality, its own flavor, its own value set. And he's trying to help this little village in an interesting and unique way. And even just on a visual level, this Italian village on the side of this hill, it's interesting to look at. It's a more fun environment than, kind of generic Boston settings. So it just kind of adds a little bit of an extra flair to it that makes it pop a little bit more. The other nice touch in here is having Dakota Fanning in it as member of the agency that he's working with. And if you didn't realize this, back 20 years ago, he did a movie called Man on Fire with Tony Scott, where he's this guy protecting the little girl. The little girl was Dakota Fanning. And so there's just, that adds oh, that's kind of nice. Like 20 years later, she's all grown up. They're working together, partnering up. And they even kind of tie that into the story with what they do with the revelations about what's going on with her character and why he reached out to her. This kind of ends things on a really nice note. And not that Robert has this big character arc here, but they find a way to give him a peace and a rest while still using his skills and finding a place that he's supposed to be in a way that just kind of hits a lot of right notes. Now, I was thinking about potentially going to put this one higher. Like it could have maybe made it to the top spot. I was kind of going back and forth. I think the problem here is the villains aren't nearly as compelling as they were in the first and second films, where each of those had someone that was really interesting that you wanted to see taken out. And here it feels a little bit more generic mob is the bad guys. Bad guys that need to be taken out. And then to pull in Dakota's character, they add kind of this grander conspiracy of what's going on that feels kind of shoehorned in just so you could get her in the movie. Because on Robert's side, it's very small, local, protect the people from the bad guys coming into town. And then it's like keeps alluding to this grander European conspiracy about drugs and terrorists. The movie's not really about that, though. It's just like a thing they keep referencing. And Robert's just trying to protect these local people. So, like, at the end of it, I thought, it's like, we can have one more twist. Is there going to be one more person he's taken out? Oh, no, the movie's ending right now. Okay, fine. So it ended on kind of a weird note because it built up all this bigger, grander stuff and doesn't go anywhere with it. So if they'd paid that off a little bit better, made the villains someone you cared more about seeing them taken out, I think it could have hit a little bit more. If you combine the power fantasy, revenge fantasy payoff at the end with everything with Dakota and the peace that he finds, it could have been number one. It was real close. But coming in at number one is going to be The Equalizer, the first film. As I just said, the third one and first one are pretty close. Second one's not too far behind. They're all kind of very solid throwback action thrillers. They're the type of movie that we got a lot back in the 90s, and we don't get them quite as much anymore, except from Liam Neeson, and every few years one from Denzel Washington. Denzel Washington is keeping the quality level higher than Liam Neeson keeps his quality level. And a lot of that is Antoine Fuqua, who's been directing these throwback action thrillers since they weren't throwback action thrillers. They were just action thrillers. Actually, back in the late 90s, his first movie was called The Replacement Killers. And that movie was Chow Yun-fat's big crossover movie where he was the huge star in Hong Kong doing these collaborations with John Woo. And then he crossed over to Hollywood, and the first movie that he did was actually with Antoine Fuqua. And at the time, I didn't care for the film because I'd already seen all of the John Woo movies. That John Woo's the master of gunplay, and Antoine Fuqua's not quite as flashy with everything, so it felt a little bit tame to me by comparison. But as time sometimes does, Antoine Fuqua's become kind of one of these just consistent directors that this type of movie that I love and grew up on, he's the guy still putting them out there. And pulling that back to this specific film, you get this adaptation of an kind of forgotten 80s TV show where this film series, because it stars Denzel Washington, has kind of made that other one just completely disappear into the past. And when you think The Equalizer, you think Denzel Washington, or if you watch network television, maybe Queen Latifah. But it's just a tried and true fun concept. There's a mysterious guy with a set of skills that wants to help people. Sounds a little bit like Taken, but not really. It's certainly in the same ballpark, but with its own flavor, a little bit more local in the way that it plays out. And you just have this guy working a very bland job, and whenever he sees injustice, he wants to set it right. And because of that, the movie can be a little bit episodic, especially in the first half of the film. There's all these little episodes of him helping people, setting things right, taking out corrupt cops. And then you have the trickle down of one of these people that he saves leads to this big organization coming after him. And so you have the little episodic fun, he's a local superhero kind of stuff, plus the grander scheme of this entire group of mobsters kind of coming at him with this one guy in particular that set his eyes on him to take him out, that's just sick, twisted. You want to see him take it out. And the whole thing kind of crescendos with the very memorable hardware store finale that is the standout action sequence of the entire franchise that everyone remembers. Like, oh, remember when he was in that hardware store just taking dudes out? And even the way that it does some of the shots, like the most iconic shots for this franchise is him in the rain holding the gun, but he's not in the rain. He's in a hardware store and the sprinklers are on, and it's just such a cool shot. It plays awesome in the movie. And sure, it's like Home Alone for adults, but it's like Home Alone for adults. That's exactly what makes it awesome. So I love these types of movies. Each one of these movies delivers what I want. And I think this one just stands out a little bit more because it was the first one, it was the freshest, and you gotta just get to see him in his element. But this one and the third one I think are really pretty close because that an Italian setting in the third one. Let me know your thoughts down below. How do you rank the Equalizer movies? Also, I've ranked some other past action thriller franchise type stuff. You can check some of those out right over here. Thank you so much for watching. Keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.